Hey up you lot, how are we doing? I hope we're all well and happy and fully recovered from any festivities that may have occurred on New Year's Eve. So, a little while ago, I did a video about some of my favourite old school goth stuff from being an old school goth. And I always planned to do a part two, which was, it's kind of a bit weird. So, as I've said before in my previous video, if you haven't seen that, I'll put a link in the description. Go and have a watch. Like, goth was kind of regional. It's odd. My friends in Manchester or Newcastle or York, there were different bands that they were into, and it seemed to encompass goths from that city. And I guess a lot of it comes from your friends, the community that you're in, local record shops that back in the 80s and that would stock what they chose to stock, and DJs. If you went to a local club, we used to go to the Phono in the Merrion Centre in Leeds. It was the same DJs, so everybody in that region would hear songs and kind of get into songs that way. So it makes sense that it was kind of regional. One weird thing was that fashion was regional as well. But hey, we all influence each other as a little subcultural group. But there was a lot of bands that definitely weren't goth bands at all. That goths up and down the country, well, mainly in the north of England, because that's where my friends and peer group was. Bands that weren't goth bands at all, that were embraced by goths and kind of became as important as bands like Bauhaus and Sisters of Mercy and Susie and the Banshees, even though probably none of them would say that they're goth bands. I know Bauhaus and Sisters vehemently denied that they were, no, we're not goth, we're just a rock band. But you can't have any kind of old school goth record collection without those three bands, really, I think, in my personal and humble opinion. So I've picked 10 artists that were embraced by the burgeoning goth scene as I remember. And it's not like there's some of these artists release so much material. It's not everything, but there were certain bits and bobs that we loved. So let's start having a look. Oh, I've also made a Spotify playlist. It's not necessarily everything that's on these LPs. There's one or two that maybe I couldn't find on Spotify, or ones that from a band that I haven't got on vinyl but I've got on CD, and I don't want to be waving CDs at you. But there is a playlist, and there'll be a link in the description as well. So first up, these are in no particular order. These are just as this is the order of the pile that I've got next to me, and so the order of the Spotify playlist in no way we're not getting to like a number one top spot. It's just an assortment. So first up is In the Nursery, a band from Sheffield, who are still recording, very much active, making amazing music. Do check them out. And with a lot of these bands, they embrace different ideas and themes and styles. So this is their second album, Stormhorse, and it might not be the same as what they're doing now. It's that I like bands that kind of mix it up a bit. So these were very much sought after. It's kind of like if you imagine Philip Glass drinking absinthe all day and reading Edgar Allan Poe and then trying to write some music. I think that's pretty much what In the Nursery sound like in my head anyway. always interesting, always doing unusual things. And yeah, I still see the chaps, the brothers. It's two brothers. I still see the guys out and about at gigs. They're very active in the Sheffield music scene. Next up, one of the big names in the list, Iggy Pop. This is one of my absolute favourites, The Idiot, produced by David Bowie. Okay, so eagle-eyed viewers will notice a distinct lack of Bowie in this list. Now, I'm not dissing Bowie. He was obviously massively popular. I personally didn't get the Bowie thing. Just about everything he did left me cold. And that's just my personal taste. And that's cool. I've listened to a lot of Bowie because I've kind of thought there must be something there that I'm missing. Same with the Beatles. So many of my friends are so passionate about the Beatles. It's like, there's something I'm missing there. And I've listened to Bowie and just not... There's nothing that's just kind of connected an exciting synapse in my brain. But I know he's very, very popular with, in the goth community, especially the old school goth lot, that, people have done covers of his songs and all sorts of stuff. So Bowie is popular with goths, but not this old goth. So I think this is Iggy Pop's gloomiest album. It's quite bleak and synthy. Maybe that's Bowie's influence. He was a talented songwriter and producer. Like I said, just not necessarily my cup of tea. But yeah, Iggy Pop, we were all a bit disgusted when Trainspotting came out and everyone was like, oh, Iggy Pop's really cool, isn't he? And we were like, Iggy Pop's been cool forever. He's wonderful. So that one is a corker. Next up, this one isn't on the playlist, but there's a song by this performer on the playlist. This is representative of how interesting this guy is. And it's Mark Armand. So, Mark Armand, at the same time he was rocking Top of the Pops with Soft Cell, and obviously his version of Tainted Love is very popular amongst goths. Marilyn Manson covered it, didn't he? And I know Manson is popular with some areas of the goth community. Again, not necessarily my cup of tea. So, and an interesting story about Mark Armand. My best friend studied at university in Leeds, where Mark Armand was studying. And his flatmate was best mates with Mark Armand. And Mark Armand used to go around to my best mate's flat for tea, to have beans on toast, when he was skint. That's as close as I get to a brush with fame. So this is a recording of... The one on the Spotify playlist is Mark Armand and the Willing Sinners, a track from that album, which is brilliant. But this is an example of how odd things got with Mark Armand. So this is a recording of a piece of performance art from 1983 with members of Coil and Zoskia providing not music, sound, and Mark Armand screaming a monologue over the top. The whole thing was overseen by Peter Christopherson from Throbbing Gristle. And it was a fairly legendary live performance art piece. This recording of it came out in, was it 2018 on Cold Spring Records? I'm a bit of a Cold Spring collector. I love all that like weird, dark ambient, industrial, neo-folk, strange, unpleasant stuff that Cold Spring put out. But this is an example of how it's like Mark Armand's duality. There was the soft cell, the pop star, the little elfin creature you'd see on Top of the Pops, singing about kind of love and sadness, and then there was this bleak, theatrical, just thoroughly fascinating performer. And he didn't do that on Top of the Pops. We wouldn't have been able to do this performance art on Top of the Pops because he would have needed to put some more clothes on than he was wearing, apparently, at the performance. But I was a bit too young to go at the time. Next up is another Sheffield band. My Goth Essentials video was very northern centred, I think, and so is this. Not a goth band, but ones that the goths embraced, and that's Cabaret Voltaire. So this is their 1979 live album that is just a sleeve with a stamp on it, and I have never, ever, ever found a clean one in my life. I think it's an impossibility. Like, a porous, completely white sleeve is going to get stained. I think this is the cleanest one I've ever found. Live, they were... obviously, I was too young to see them then, but listening to recordings... they did so much interesting stuff. And again, changed everything up. Started off in one particular style, reflecting the stark industrial landscape of late 70s Sheffield, and eventually becoming a fully fledged pop group. But some of the early stuff I remember hearing in clubs, stuff like Nag Nag Nag, which is on the playlist, just absolutely blowing my mind. It was like danceable, harsh, industrial pop, not like anything we'd ever heard, and it was always, Nag 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 was always played in the clubs. Next up, you might think is a bit of an odd one, but it's The Crazy World of Arthur Brown. That Arthur Brown that did Fire and was on Top of the Pops with his hat on fire. I am a huge fan of Arthur Brown, and not just this particular LP, going on to Kingdom Come and Rustic Hinge and Puddleton Express. And there is going to be a video about Arthur Brown because he, during his heyday, he was a fascinating and confrontational musical rebel. Now, this is odd. This as young goths, we didn't really listen to Arthur Brown that much, but he started being booked at goth festivals, alongside, like Skeletal Family and The Damned, and there'd be Arthur Brown popping up on stage, doing all sorts of crazy stuff with his white face, black eyes, looking like kind of black metal makeup before black metal, singing about blasphemy and nightmares. And it was kind of like, we went kind of going, Arthur Brown? Fire was alright, but I don't know any more of his songs. And then just this captivating performer would come on the stage and you didn't know what to do. He was engaging and thrilling, and he's still performing today, isn't he? But back, he's quite old now, so he doesn't have that. He's kind of too old to do all the crazy stuff. But this is a really odd and dark album, and seeing him live, we started hunting down his older stuff, and it was a bit more expensive to get hold of, but we did love all that kind of stuff. Another slightly older performer with a bit of historical pedigree is Nico. And as much as I adore the album Chelsea Girl, I think it's just beautiful. I know Nico didn't like it. Legend has it that when she wasn't involved in the mix of Chelsea Girl, in the production of it, she did her part and then somebody else kind of put more instrumentation in. And when she heard the final mix for the first time, she cried through utter disappointment because she hated it so much. So when she was given the opportunity to do her own thing, it was dark and bleak and fascinating. And there's a lot of kind of the early CD compilations of goth stuff that came out that had recognisable bands like Sex Gang Children and stuff like that. And also Nico. And yeah, she was a big part of like the goth community. Another lady that was a big part of the goth community, I am completely in love with. And that's Damanda Gallagher. I don't really know how to describe Damanda Gallagher. She's a beautiful and bleak angel of misery. She makes harrowing and disturbing and unsettling music with not like any kind of traditional ghosty thing or anything like that. It's more than that, and it's darker than that, and it's bleaker than that, and it's much more unsettling than that. One main thing, if you know her work, is her astounding voice. She is a classically trained opera singer, but she took her vocal performances in directions that nobody else has ever come close to. To the point where I'm guessing a lot of people would turn her music off because some of it is just seems to be anguished wailing. It's very odd, very creative, and yeah, some of the most unsettling music I've ever heard in my life. This was the we kind of had a bunch of goth friends in York because there was a really good goth club in York, and they were all into Damanda Gallagher, and they introduced us to her. And that's that like regional goth thing. I still collect Damanda Gallagher records and CDs. I think she's the performer I've got most on CD because there's a lot of LPs that are very, very difficult to find and easy to find on CD. So Damanda Gallagher is one of the reasons I own a CD player. Next up is a legendary band that seems to have united subcultures. It's the Cramps. When I was a young punky goth, like, I adored the Cramps. I kind of got into them when I was in high school. And it's weird. There were so many subcultures that if there was a Venn diagram, they'd all overlap in the centre with the Cramps in the middle. Not every subculture. I guess the Oi Skin lot didn't, and I guess the Rude Boys, the Two Tone lot, it's not really their cup of tea. But like goths, punks, all the new wave kids, psychobillies, like there's so many little subcultures that seem to adore the Cramps. And it's there. I don't know what it is about them. They're Lux and Ivy. Obviously, it's mainly Lux and Ivy, isn't it? They're just joyous rock and roll, trash, horror, sleaze, gorgeous, fun noise. And like, it turns out that they're not, they covered loads of songs. They did loads of covers, and they brought songs to our attention that we might not have heard. And if you listen to, there's a series of records called Songs the Cramps Taught Us. They're great. Check those out. But like as an archivist, well, as archivists, I've got a lot of compilations on CD of like what was in Lux and Ivy's record collection, and just these mad like 45s that they preserved that would have otherwise been lost to history. The Cramps were an absolutely fascinating and wonderful band. One band that does divide opinion, that I really got into quite a few years ago, I say quite a few, more than quite a few, is Lieback. Now this album isn't on Spotify, so I've picked a song from a different album. But Lieback continue to baffle and entertain me in ways I never expected. One of the things I love about this band is that you never know what you're going to get. From album to album, they just do whatever they want. It's always interesting and unusual and quite fascinating. I mean, if you compare this to... This is quite chilled and dark. If you compare this to like some of their more recent stuff, like the Spectre album, which is danceable electro pop, it's brilliant. Or they might do a cover of an entire album, like Let It Be by the Beatles. They didn't just do cover versions of a song, they covered an album. They've done an album of cover versions of national anthems. Just like random wonderful industrial stuff. Not always industrial though, just sometimes pure disco pop, sometimes just dark haunting noise, just all over. And I adore Lieback, and they came into my sphere of things. They came onto my radar because their British distributor was Mute, who did some really they put out some really interesting records in the 80s, and I don't know if anybody else did this. There were certain labels that I'd always pick up: 4AD, Beggar's Banquet, Mute, and if it was affordable and I wasn't sure of the band, if I'd never heard them, but it was on a label that I was impressed by, then I tended to pick things up. So that's how Lieback came onto my radar. And the last one, in 10th place, are one of my still all-time favourite bands, The Doors. So, I don't know how this came about, but all my goth friends, when you go around to their house and sit smoking roll-ups and listening to records, everybody seemed to have something by The Doors. This was one that a lot of people tried to get because of the song The End. And I'm sure I've had a look for it and I can't find it. I'm sure there's a review of this album from back in 1960. I ain't got my reading glasses on, it's too small. Back in the late 60s, that described this as gothic rock. And I think it's the first usage of the term gothic rock to describe any kind of music. It's not all kind of bleak and gothic rock. Some of it's quite lively and jolly, which makes me very happy. But yeah, when the Doors went dark and bleak and unsettling, they nailed that dark and bleak and unsettling. So that's the 10. And like I said, it's in my humble opinion and from my experience, going to clubs, friends' houses, record shops in the north during that period. That was the things that we picked up on. But if you're from any other region, then I'm sure there's a lot of differences in your memories of non-goth, old school goth. So thank you for watching, guys, and I will see you lovely folks in the next video.